Grace and peace to everybody today. You've tuned in to Sunday in the House, 30 minutes of conversation on life, politics, and Jesus. And I hope it does you some good, some real good, some life good, some gospel good. I hope this program draws you closer to Jesus, the one sent by God. I hope it inspires you to forgive somebody, help somebody, perhaps to say goodbye to somebody, if that somebody is hurting you or hindering you from what God has called you to be. God bless you all today. I'm your host, Dr. Dwight A. Moody, coming to you from my Sunday morning studio in Travelers Rest, South Carolina. Isn't that a grand name for a retirement place for an old preacher? It's built along the old Swamp Rabbit Railroad, just a couple of blocks from my house. It's now the Swamp Rabbit Trail. I walk it every day, or at least 5 days a week. I hope to do so today. If you want to know more about the trail, save your money. This fall, you'll be able to buy a signed copy of my new book, How I Built the Swamp Rabbit Trail, The Adventures of Fenwick the Frog. It's my first children's book, just right for some bright little kid in your family or your church, your community, maybe lives next door. Coming in October. But coming today is Jesus, the man who is not afraid of another religion. Jesus was a Jew, of course, an observant Jew, a loyal, faithful Jew. This is why we receive the Jewish people as God's people. We think these are the people of Jesus. We love Jesus. We love his people. I hope you have some Jewish friends. But let me ask, have you ever been to a Jewish event? Like a Seder meal, or a Shabbat service, or a religious holiday event? You know, that's one thing you can do to get closer to Jesus, to spend some time with the people of Jesus. But some of you are going to ask me, well, wasn't Jesus a Christian? Well, that's a good question. It has a complicated answer. Let me ask it like this. Was Jesus a follower of Jesus? It's funny when I say it like that, isn't it? Jesus read and loved what we call the Hebrew Bible, the Torah and the prophets, the law and the prophets. He attended synagogue and temple. He was dedicated in the temple, studied with the temple scholars and local rabbis. Later, after his death, some years after his death, the followers of Jesus were called Christians. Much like we use the phrase Jesus follower. The first designation of his followers was as people of the way, W-A-Y. I like that. Later, at the church in Antioch in Syria, hundreds of miles from Jerusalem, the people of the way were first called Christians. We get all this from the book, The Acts of the Apostles. So was Jesus a Christian? Well, yes and no. Here's a better question. Would Jesus be a Christian today if he lived among us? It's hard to say. Hard to say yes or no. He would be a Jew for sure. He might be what we call a Jesus Jew or a Messianic Jew. But he would speak straight to the Jews, telling them to love God and love their neighbor, especially their Christian neighbors. And he would tell us Christians to love God and love our neighbors, especially our Jewish neighbors, and also our Muslim neighbors, and even our agnostic neighbors and our wicked neighbors. I don't know if Jesus would be a Christian. I don't know if he would be baptized. I don't know if he would go to church. Maybe he would stay home and watch Sunday in the House. I actually think he'd be rather embarrassed with a lot that goes on in his name. He'd be watching the evening news, listening to preachers and politicians claiming the endorsement of Jesus for this or that. He'd sit up straight, stare at the screen and say, "What? When did I ever say that? What gave her the idea I would go along with that? What gospel are they reading? You can just see and hear that happening, can't you? And then there are many churches that would not let Jesus in their sanctuary in the first place. Brown skin, long hair, walking everywhere. You know, that's the reason many churches have locked their doors and put up ringers and video to guard against people who come looking like Jesus. I joined a church last week. It's been a year and a half since I gave up preaching at the little church up in Hendersonville. I've visited a lot of churches, and there have been a lot of Sundays I didn't go to worship, public worship. But I joined a church last week. The people seemed glad. I'm not sure they would feel the same way about Jesus. I think they'd be nervous about him, but I think he'd feel right at home. He would, even if it was somebody of another religion. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. The few times, according to the Gospels, when a person of another faith crossed paths with Jesus, what would Jesus do? What did Jesus do? When was the first time? Let's see if you can remember this. What about those wise men from the East that came while Jesus was still a baby? They were not Jews. They were Persians, perhaps, astrologers maybe. They could have been of another religion entirely, like the religion of Zoroaster. Their priest, called Magi, studied the stars and interpreted dreams. Does that sound familiar? Jesus was an infant, of course, 2 years old, so he didn't know what was happening, has no memory of it. But it's very instructive that our most popular Christian holiday features a nativity set with 2 Jews, 3 Zoroastrians, and a bunch of animals. From the very beginning, Jesus the Jew was surrounded by very interesting people and animals. And then there's this famous story, which I've already read to you earlier this year, when Jesus took to the pulpit, as we say in the Christian tradition. Although it's likely that Jesus stood to read the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and then he sat down to interpret it, to expound it and apply it. That later became the pattern in Christian churches as well, from which we get the Latin phrase ex cathedra, that is, from the seat. But here we are in Luke chapter 4, verse 14 and following. Jesus is in Nazareth, his hometown. It's a Sabbath day. Everybody goes to the synagogue. In Jewish life, there's one temple and many synagogues. Some of you know this. Priests run the temple. Rabbis manage the synagogues. Priests offer sacrifices in the temple. Rabbis read and interpret the Bible. Got that straight? There'll be a quiz here in a minute. So Jesus reads the Bible from Isaiah. You know the famous text. I read it several weeks ago. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, freedom to the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, freedom for the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's a pretty good agenda, political or religious, don't you think? It's from Isaiah, 800 years maybe before Jesus. Jesus quotes it and says that today this is fulfilled in your hearing. Well, the people were surprised and kind of put off by that. Then the whole situation takes a dark turn. Jesus, knowing the pushback from the people, tells 2 stories from the prophetic books of the Hebrew Bible. The first is about Elijah, the prophet, who was sent to the region of Sidon, north of Jewish territory. He was sent up there to minister to the widow of Zarephath, a non-Jew outside his religion. And then his associate, Elisha, heals Naaman from Syria. Again, not a Jew. They make the point. There were lots of Jewish people who were sick. But Elisha went to Syria. Jesus tells these stories to hint at the global reach of the good news. But a secondary emphasis is this: God is as interested in people with other religious ideas as he is interested in Jews. Think about that for a minute. Jesus was not solely focused on his own religion. He was reaching out from the very start, before he was even aware of it. And then, according to the book of Luke, he calls Levi, or Matthew as we know him, he was a Jew, but not a very good one. So Jesus was not afraid of the Jews who had fallen off the Torah train, so to speak. And then there's a story about Jesus receiving the Roman soldier, chapter 7 of the Gospel of Acts. He had a servant who was sick. Did Jesus turn him down? Did he say no to the Roman man of whatever religion and who knows what religion? Rome had a lot of religious traditions and practices. He could have been almost anything. No, Jesus received that man as quick as he did any Jew. He healed the servant. It's a great story. Did Jesus say this? No, that man's not a Jew. He's not part of our covenant. He doesn't have papers. He needs to go home. Report him to ICE. Hold him until ICE gets here. We don't want foreigners overrunning our country, bringing in their religion, their language, their customs. This is Jewish land, by God. It'll remain Jewish land. Does that sound like Jesus? I don't think so. Then this happened. Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem for the last time. I talked about that last week. His peeps went into a Samaritan village to get some supplies, but the people were resistant. Samaritans didn't have pure lineage, you might say. Many people consider them half-breeds, not full Jews, compromised. Their papers were not in order, in other words. And the disciples wanted to call down fire from heaven and destroy them. Jesus said no. He rebuked his own people, not the Samaritans. And then there is his most famous story about the Samaritan. You know this one. We call it the Good Samaritan. It's not the good Jew. It's the Good Samaritan. It's not the good Christian. It's about the Jew who was beaten up by thugs, evidently other Jews, and left to die. A priest comes along, and instead of helping, he pulls out his phone and takes a picture, puts it up on Facebook. And then another temple employee comes around, sees the man in the ditch, crawling to safety, crying for help. This man pulls out his phone, takes a video, puts it up on TikTok. But then the foreigner, the outcast, the undocumented man, the Samaritan, comes by, sees the Jew in the ditch, and goes to his aid. Gets out his first aid kit, binds up his wounds, takes him to the nearest place of help, and pays for his care. He never asks, do you have insurance? He never asks, are you working? Are you on food stamps? You can see the important things to Jesus and how different they are than what is important to so many Christians in America. This is why Jesus would not be comfortable in many churches in America. American Christians would say, what's that man doing in our part of the city? Doesn't he know better than traveling alone? Get out his insurance papers. Check and see if he has a green card. See what I mean? What was the question Jesus asked his disciples at the end of that story? The question is this: which of these three men was a neighbor to the man in the ditch? Which of these three men was a neighbor to the man in the ditch? That's the way he determined whether somebody was reading the Bible right and following Jesus right. You know what he did not ask? Which of these men has a copy of the Ten Commandments on the wall in his house? Which of these men attended the synagogue last Sabbath? Which of these men has Jewish citizenship papers? No, none of those questions. The hero of this story, the most famous story Jesus ever told, is the man who was a neighbor a helper in a time of need to the man in trouble. The hero was not a Jew, was not a Christian, was not a Muslim. The hero is the man, the woman, the boy or girl who was a neighbor to the person in need. You know who can be a neighbor? A Muslim can be your neighbor. You know who can be your neighbor? A Hindu or an atheist. Jesus was less interested in your religious affiliation than he was in your neighborly inclination. Jesus told the story about a non-Jew helping somebody and giving his money to take care of him. Did that count as the temple tax? Did that count as a tithe and an offering? Did that register in heaven just like money in the offering plate? Who was the better believer, the Jewish priest or the Samaritan traveler? One last illustration of Jesus and world religions. Chapter 11, Gospel of Luke. Jesus describes what he calls this wicked generation. He was referring to the Jews, his own people, God's people. He says at the day of judgment, they will be condemned. These Bible-reading, worship-attending believers will be condemned. By whose testimony? By the testimony of non-Jews. The Queen of the South is named for one, and the people of Nineveh named. Nineveh was a foreign city. They were not Jews. Jesus said they will bear testimony against the Bible-believing people, and their testimony will condemn the people of the covenant. Think about that. Let's put it in contemporary language. We Christians are a wicked generation. When the day of judgment comes, who will rise up and condemn the Christians? Well, it'll be the Muslims and the communists. That's who. These people are watching the Christians and can see that we're not acting like Christians. We're not acting like Jews, and certainly not like Jesus. There'll be witnesses against us. He won't need to call upon our own preachers and evangelists, our own priests and apostles. We don't need those witnesses. People all over the world will bear testimony. It was those Christians who were bombing us and cutting off aid, blowing up our little boats, invading our countries. We don't need the secularists and the atheists to come into court and bear testimony. The world can tell that we're lying about who we are as a Christian nation. Even they can tell we're deceiving ourselves. We claim to care for people. We claim to feed the poor and free the oppressed. There I'm quoting Jesus. We claim to welcome the stranger and take care of those in need. That's what Christians claim, especially here in the United States. But who knows the truth? Not us, but those who have not been baptized. That's my red letter lesson of the day. Straight to you. Straight out of the gospel. Straight out of the Bible. My red letter lesson for today. Because of all the ungodly behavior by American Christians toward strangers, pagans, Muslims, and the poor, we're condemning people of other religions as they come into our land to live and love and work. We say, oh, they're here around us. We want to prevent them from building houses and starting businesses and building houses of worship. They're the stranger within the gate, my friend. They're the sojourner. They are our neighbors. But we're treating them as dangerous criminals, trespassers, invaders, as unbelievers, as enemies of Jesus. Jesus was not afraid of the non-Jew. Over and over again, he treated them in word and deed as the children of his heavenly Father. The big question these days is, are we going to be a Christian nation? A lot of chatter about that. In the studios, on the airwaves, are we going to be a Christian nation? If we are, it's not by plastering our walls with text of holy words, but by treating the strangers among us as people, as beloved of God, as brothers and sisters. Do you remember what the preacher said in the National Cathedral on Inauguration Day 2025. She took to the pulpit like Jesus, looked at all the rich and powerful people. Do you remember what she said? Have mercy. Have mercy. Have mercy. Do you remember what the old gospel hymn says? Mercy there was great, and grace was free. By there was meant where Jesus was when he died on the cross, at the very time he could have sought revenge and retaliation. No, the hymn writer was exactly on target. Mercy there was great, and grace was free. Now, I've watched a video clip a number of times, and I'm going to play it for you today. It's of a sermon, of the end of a sermon, by a man named Alistair Begg. He's a preacher, much more conservative than I am, but this is a wonderful statement of the gospel. It's a splendid version of gospel preaching, a memorable story of Jesus giving mercy when he would have been justified in giving meanness. I want you to watch it and think about it.
Without the preaching of the cross, without preaching the cross to ourselves all day and every day, we will very, very quickly revert to faith plus works as the ground of our salvation. So that, to go to the old Fort Lauderdale question, if you were to die tonight and you were getting entry into heaven, what would you say? If you answer that, and if I answer it in the first person, we've immediately gone wrong. Because I believed, because I have faith, because I am this, because I am continuing. Loved ones, the only proper answer is in the third person, because he. Think about the thief on the cross. And what an immense, I can't wait to find that fellow one day to ask him, how did that shake out for you? Because you were cussing the guy out with your friend. You've never been in a Bible study. You never got baptized. You didn't know a thing about church membership. And yet you made it. You made it. How did you make it? That's what the angel must have said, like, what are you doing here? Well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, because I don't know. Well, excuse me, let me get my supervisor. They go get the supervisor ranger. So, just a few questions for you. First of all, are you clear on the doctrine of justification by faith? The guy said, I never heard of it in my life. And what about, let's just go to the doctrine of Scripture immediately. This guy's just staring. And eventually, in frustration, he says, on what basis are you here? And he said, the man on the middle cross said, I can come. Now, that is the only answer. That is the only answer. And if I don't preach the gospel to myself all day and every day, then I will find myself beginning to trust myself, trust my experience, which is part of my fallenness as a man. If I take my eyes off the cross, I can then give only lip service to its efficacy, while at the same time living as if my salvation depends upon me. And as soon as you go there, it will lead you either to abject despair or a horrible kind of arrogance. And it is only the cross of Christ that deals both with the dreadful depths of despair and the pretentious arrogance of the pride of man that says, I can figure this out and I'm doing wonderfully well. No, because the sinless Savior died, my sinful soul is counted free, for God the just is satisfied to look on him and pardon me. That's why Luther says most of your Christian life is outside of you, in this sense, that we know that we're not saved by good works. We're not saved as a result of our professions, but we're saved as a result of what Christ has achieved.
I like that great statement. The man on the middle cross said I could come. The man in the middle cross said I could come. Now, I have a very expansive interpretation of that statement, probably much wider than that preacher. I think it applies to all of us. Even a lot of people who never took up the title Christian or Jew. Well, I want to close out the day with a word about our Tangle Tour of 26. We've got our logo and our banner and our poster. I want to show you that. Thank you for all of your interest and enthusiasm. Some of you that are not even on the tour route have said you're driving across your state to be a part of the fun. I want to thank you. You can watch our travelogue on social media, YouTube and Facebook. We're going to be recording and broadcasting every day, every event. You can follow along and you can help finance it. One man who cannot attend, I think he's out of the country, is sending money so that we can buy a book for everybody who comes to the Louisville event. Another person wrote also from far away to say, I'm sending a small check. I don't know whether she meant the check itself was small or the amount was small. But I'm going to put that in a Tangle Tour account. We have to rent an SUV, we have to have some overnight accommodations along the way, and we have to eat. You can make a donation to that, to our tour. So visit the support page at themeetinghouse.net. You can send a check to the address that's on that page, or you can give through the website. And all the money that comes in August, September, and October, those 3 months, will be used for the tour purpose, except those of you who give automatically each month. There are 6 or 7 of you, thank God, who do give automatically each month. But all of you today can be a part of the Tangle Tour. We invite you to pray for us, to buy a book or two, make a donation, attend an event if you can. Greenville, Nashville, Owensboro, Louisville, Lexington, Covington, Kentucky, Lexington again, and then we think end up in Hendersonville, North Carolina. You can stay abreast of all of it. You can visit themeetinghouse.net/Tangle26. Themeetinghouse.net, Tangle26. That'll keep you up to date on all the news, including which of our books we're focusing on at each of the events. Thank you for tuning in today. I am Dwight A. Moody, your host. With me today and each week is the engineer and videographer, Ben Payne. Thank you, Ben. He will be with me on the tour. I want to pause today and wish him a very happy birthday, Ben Payne. This has been Sunday in the House. I hope you have a blessed day.